Tractate Moed Katan largely discusses the laws of intermediate days of holidays, specifically the biblical holidays of Sukkot and Passover, both of which are over a week long. However, the days of the holiday are split largely into two stores. The actual holiday parts, which are the first 2 days and the last one, and have strict laws and prohibitions similar to the Shabbos, which are largely discussed in Tractate Be'ah. In between these days are what's known as the intermediate days of the holiday, or Chol HaMoed, as it's called. They are still a part of the holiday, but have much more relaxed prohibitions, and are very similar to common weekdays, save for a few exceptions. So this tractate will be discussing these laws. Chapter 1 of Tractate Moed Katan will discuss some laws of agriculture, purity, and otherwise in regards to the intermediate days of these holidays. The first Mishnah says, you may irrigate a field during the intermediate days of the holiday if it needs irrigation from any spring, whether it emerged on the holiday or not. You may not use collected rainwater, which requires exertion, or use a well pole called a shaduf. You may also not make circular ditches around grapevines on these days. And Rabbi Eliezer says you also may not make a water channel during the intermediate holiday days, or during a sabbatical year. The rabbis say you can build one during the sabbatical year and repair one during the intermediate days of a holiday. Also, on the intermediate days, you may repair or clean damaged public water cisterns. You can repair roads, streets, and mikvahs, ritual baths. You can mark graves to inform people in regards to the laws of purity. And inspectors can go out to uproot plants that were planted in forbidden mixtures called kilayim. The Gemara says it was necessary to teach also that you can use an old spring in addition to a new one, as an old one is less likely to break, so you might have thought it would be permissible to repair, even if the field does not need irrigation. So it says both to say you can only repair them if the field needs to be irrigated. It also brings verses as source. The general logic of the Mishnah was that it would be permissible to work during the intermediate days of the holiday to prevent a financial loss, but not to increase your profit. Although you can't excessively exert yourself either way. There's debate as to who it is that holds these opinions based on logic by related cases. This is discussed. There's related debate by the laws of Shabbos. If a person weeds or waters seedlings on Shabbos, some say he's liable for the prohibition of plowing, as you're loosening earth. Some say of sowing, as you're causing a plant to grow. We say this is difficult, as seemingly it should be an issue of both, which could be a thing based on other cases. We also say, in regards to the laws of forbidden plant mixtures, if you weed or cover the roots of such plants, according to Rabbi Akiva, this is impermissible, as you're maintaining such plants. This is based off verses. Anyways, how is it permitted to irrigate a field during the sabbatical year when you're not allowed to maintain a field during such a year? So it says this refers to the sabbatical year of present times when the prohibition is only a rabbinic institution, and it brings a source. Some say it's because subcategories of forbidden farming labor are not biblically forbidden during the sabbatical year, save for the subcategories of pruning and grape picking, which are specified. This is further discussed with some qualifications like forbidding only certain types of hoeing, like to strengthen a tree and similar. There's also debate in regards to plowing on a sabbatical year based off verses. This is discussed along with the sources for other prohibitions. The points on the sabbatical year, their laws and timings, are further qualified. The dates of this period are also discussed. We've said you couldn't use a well pole, as that uses excessive effort. But what's the excessive effort with rain? Some say because it's just similar to a well pole. Some say because if you collect rainwater from a cistern, eventually you'll need to draw it with a bucket, which will take a lot of effort. They would argue over a stream which collects water from pools based on their respective logics. We say you are permitted to draw water from them on the intermediate days of a holiday, as they don't stop flowing, so the water level won't drop to the point where you'll need to expend effort by bringing it up with a bucket. You wouldn't be able to take water from temporary pools unless a water channel passes between them, and only when majority of the fields can be watered from the channel. Others say it can even be if only a minority of the fields can be watered from the channel, as it refills, so you can water it over a few days. In addition, you can also irrigate a field from a pool that forms from a field which was irrigated if the water is still trickling, and so long as the spring from the first field is still flowing. Similarly, it says if there are two garden beds, one atop the other, you can't take water from the lower one to the upper one, as that's too much exertion. You can't even take it to the upper level if it's one garden bed with a part that's at a higher level. Some also clarify that you can draw water to irrigate vegetables if it's to eat them, and not to enhance their appearance. There are further related points on this and some specific unique cases discussed. We also said you could repair or clean public cisterns, however digging a new one is not permitted. Some actually allow it if they're needed by the public. There are similar cases discussed, and it mentions based on them that you can also clean a private cistern, ditch, or cave if they're needed, but you can't dig a new one of those, whether private or public, if they're not needed. This is further discussed. We also said you could mark graves for laws of impurity, and it cites verses as sources, which are also brought. If it's super small, like a grave smaller than an olive volume, or a bone smaller than a barley grain, or if it doesn't impart impurity the way a tent does, meaning it's only imparting impurity through direct content. It's not marked. You do mark a skull, spine, or a majority of the skeletal structure, or a majority of the number of bones. They also don't mark a known spot of impurity. You're only marking uncertain places, and it gives some examples. These points are further discussed. This goes further. It gives instances of how certain grave locations were marked with certain types of stones and similar. In regards to the inspectors going out to uproot forbidden plant mixtures, it asks, what's the concern of this happening during the intermediate holiday periods? As was mentioned in an earlier tractate, this is done at a set time in the Hebrew month of Adar. So some say this is done by the late crop in this period. Some say it's done with vegetables as opposed to grain, which is done in Adar. Some say Adar is when they uproot non-recognizably blossomed plants, while recognizable blossoms can be taken at these other dates. The uprooting by inspectors is done during the intermediate days of the holiday to give them an income then, and they're paid from the temple treasury. It also provides a bit of definition in regards to the laws of forbidden plant mixtures as to what exactly constitutes a prohibition. It was instituted that the crops uprooted should be ownerless, so that way nobody uses this as an opportunity to get free work done. New Mishnah. On the intermediate days of a holiday, you can draw water from tree to tree as long as you're not watering the entire field. There's debate if you can water plants which were not watered before the holiday. The Gemara clarifies that this doesn't apply to plants that had been watered before the holiday, or if the field was moist beforehand. Others would still allow watering them even if they didn't have these qualifications. You would be allowed to sprinkle a garden on these days as it turns a late crop into an early one. Others say doing so isn't allowed by the intermediate days of a holiday, but this would be allowed by a sabbatical year. This is discussed. New Mishnah. During the intermediate holiday days, you can trap mice or moles in your grain field like you usually do, and it's also permitted on a sabbatical year. Others say this is allowed in an orchard, but in a grain field you can't do it in your typical manner. You can seal a breach in your wall to a garden, or even build such a wall on the intermediate holiday days, or on a sabbatical year. The Gemara gives the definition of a mole. It also says how to stop an anthill by taking soil from one anthill and exchanging it with another, so the ants start fighting. This would even work if the anthills are totally separated, up to the distance of a parsa. The usual manner of trapping an animal is to dig a hole and put a trap in it. An atypical manner is to put a spit into the ground and whack it with a spade to spear any animals underground. Some allow trapping in a usual manner by a grain field next to an orchard. The wall breach mentioned is sealed with certain tree branches, just as a temporary barrier. Some say to fill it with stone, but don't plaster it, and this is referring to a garden wall. With a courtyard wall, you can seal it normally. There are related points discussed. We said building the wall by a sabbatical year is even by a garden wall. New Mishnah. If someone has leprosy, impurity, they need to be examined. On the intermediate days of the holiday, a priest can declare someone pure after such an examination, but can only declare someone impure after the holiday. Others say you can't examine someone for this at all. The Gemara discusses these points and similar opinions. It says everyone holds that a priest can examine someone in their first week of quarantine. The debate is if it's allowed during the second week. These opinions are further discussed in regards to the laws of leprosy examination. This is all qualified further. New Mishnah. You can rebury your parents in a permanent grave on the intermediate days of a holiday, as this will bring a person joy. Others say it's not allowed, as it will bring mourning. Everyone says you cannot arouse lamentation for the death of a relative during a holiday, or eulogize 30 days before one of the pilgrimage holidays. The Gemara debates these opinions. New Mishnah. You may not dig crypts or graves on the intermediate days of a holiday, but you can adjust them. You can construct a laundry pond on these days, or a coffin for a corpse in your courtyard, but others disallow it unless you have the boards there with you. The Gemara gives definition to these structures. The adjustment of a crypt is to enlarge or shrink it. It also defines what a laundry pond is, and the remaining points are discussed. New Mishnah. You may not marry on the intermediate days of a holiday. No one, not even people doing a levirate marriage, can, but you may remarry a divorced wife. A woman can wear cosmetics during these days, but some have disallowed the application of lime as a depilatory, as it won't temporarily look good, and she'll be distressed. A regular person can sew as he normally does, but a craftsman can only make temporary stitches. Some say you can interweave cords of a bed frame, some say you can only do this to tighten them. The Gemara explains that the weddings cause joy, and we don't want to mix the joy with the joy of the holiday. Some say because then you'll spend the whole period paying attention to your wife and not to the holiday. The reverse is brought as sources. Some say it's because then people would start delaying their weddings to be on holidays and would be pushing off the obligation to have children and others. It says elsewhere that you can marry on the eve of a holiday. This works like the opinion that the issue is of mixing joys, as the holiday hasn't started yet, and the wedding joy is mainly on that day. According to the opinion that the issue is that you'll be preoccupied with one, again, they're on separate days. And according to the opinion that people would push off their weddings until then, that's not a concern here, as it's only a single date, so people wouldn't risk pushing off their wedding to a single date in case of unforeseen events occurring. There are other sources for these principles brought, and they're discussed along with some related points. It goes further. It also qualifies the points on women's cosmetics and the others. Some allow it only by young women who are particular about such things. Others say even old women can. There are points on the function of depilatories. The points on sewing and beds are also discussed. New Mishnah. You can set up an oven, stove, or mill during these days. Some say you can't chisel millstones for the first time. The Gemara further defines these points, and these points are qualified with further definition brought. New Mishnah. Only a common person can construct a roof or balconies railings during these days, not a professional. You can plaster over and smooth cracks in an oven by hand or by foot, but not with a tool. You can fix hinge parts, a crossbeam, and a lock and key as long as you didn't intend before the holiday to do it then. You can also preserve foods that you can eat on the holiday. The Gemara gives further definition to all of these points and actions as to what exactly they constitute, and the logics as to why they're permissible. And that's the end of chapter 1.